Abraham Lincoln and the Brownings, a close, warm, and sincere friendship. Abraham Lincoln, Orville Browning, and Eliza Caldwell Browning were all born in Kentucky and migrated west, later residing in different parts of Illinois. The three met one another in their late 20s, and even though their backgrounds and personalities were quite different, a close, warm, and sincere friendship flourished for 30 years. They became devoted and lifelong friends. Browning was a lawyer when he came to Quincy in 1831, and Lincoln became a lawyer in 1836. That same year, Eliza Caldwell married Browning and moved to Quincy from Kentucky. Subsequently, she became steeped in political life when her husband was elected to the state legislature months later. Browning and Abraham Lincoln were closely associated in the legislature as fellow members of the Whig Party. Lincoln had been elected in 1834. The two shared many political and philosophical ideals. Orville Browning became one of Lincoln's closest friends, advisors, and colleagues. A similar bond of friendship with Lincoln and Mrs. Browning began when they met in the state capitol at Vandalia at the start of the 1836 legislative session. When Eliza Browning lived with her husband during session, Lincoln spent most of his spare time visiting with Eliza in the Brownings' boarding rooms. The nature of their early relationship is reflected in a highly personal 1838 letter Lincoln wrote to Eliza about a recent ineffective and unconventional failed courtship. In the letter, he satirized his meeting with Kentuckian Mary Owens. The lengthy letter suggests an easy familiarity and respected intelligence between the cultured Mrs. Browning and the unpolished Lincoln. Both shared a love of storytelling, poetry, and literature. At the close of the Owens letter, Lincoln adds, "Write me a long yarn about something to amuse me." Through the following decades, the Brownings had close family connections with Lincoln's wife Mary and their boys as well. In an 1847 letter, Lincoln refers to his sons, Robert and Edward, as Bob and Ed. Eliza sometimes accompanied Browning to Springfield, and unlike other friends, they visited the Lincolns privately in their home. Mary liked Eliza and was not threatened by her friendship with her husband. The Brownings raised two foster children, Emma and William, who were an intimate part of the family connection. On the day of the 1858 Lincoln-Douglas debate in Quincy, Eliza, an accomplished hostess, honored Lincoln at a noon luncheon and held a celebratory evening reception at the Browning home on Hampshire between 7th and 8th Streets. The celebration went into the night with fireworks illuminating the skies. In the following days and months after the debate, Lincoln's name rose as a possible candidate for the presidential nomination. Browning and several Quincy colleagues were critical to Lincoln's nomination for president in May of 1860 at the Republican Convention in Chicago. Browning spoke at the convention and later campaigned at area rallies for Lincoln to help him win the presidency. And in late October, the Brownings held an all-day open house for Lincoln supporters. On November 6, 1860, Lincoln was elected president. Before the inauguration, Lincoln urged Browning to accompany him on the train to Washington, but because of other commitments, Browning went with the president-elect only as far as Indianapolis. Browning was one of a very few people to whom Lincoln showed a draft of his inaugural address for advice, and Orville recommended a change that Lincoln adopted. Browning would soon follow Lincoln to Washington. After the death of Stephen Douglas in June of 1861, Governor Richard Yates appointed Orville Browning to the U.S. Senate seat from Illinois. Already a close advisor to the president, Browning played a meaningful role behind the scenes, and became Lincoln's personal pipeline regarding Senate activities. In February 1862, at the Lincolns' request, the Brownings were at the White House constantly in the days and weeks surrounding the death of the Lincoln son, 10-year-old Willie. Standing in for the grief-stricken parents, they received for the family in the green room next to Willie's coffin. On the night of the funeral, Eliza and Orville sat up with Tad until after 2 a.m. At Lincoln's insistence, Eliza stayed another week at the White House and cared for Tad. In the first weeks of summer, Orville went to the Lincolns' personal sanctuary, the Soldiers' Home, 5 times, where the Lincolns were in seclusion after Willie's death. Before returning to Quincy after the legislative season, Orville and Eliza Browning rode to the rural sanctuary on July 25, 1862. The evening of the official 60-day notice of the emancipation. Orville had written a 15-page letter to Lincoln in September of 1861, in which he laid out the key foundational justification on which to base the legal support of presidential power to issue a proclamation. On the evening of Lincoln's assassination, Good Friday, April 14, 1865, Orville Browning stopped by the president's office at 7 p.m. Lincoln had already left for Ford's Theater. Lincoln was assassinated at 10:20 p.m., and the Brownings were notified within the hour. When told what had happened, the couple were overwhelmed with horror. Orville went to the White House early the next morning. Lincoln's body had been taken into the state bedroom. Later, when the autopsy took place in the West Wing on the second floor, Orville Browning was the only non-military, non-medical person at the autopsy. Lincoln's friendship with Eliza was unlike any other female friendship. She became his confidant with whom he could converse with ease, a loyal supporter, and a friend who oriented Lincoln in his early adulthood to a higher social class. Their bond remained strong through the decades. Theodore Calvin Pease, editor of the Browning Diary, wrote that Eliza's force of mind made her a respected advisor of men who ordinarily despised the brains of women. Significantly, hers was the longest and closest female friendship in Lincoln's life. Lincoln scholars are indebted to Orville Browning and the diary he kept beginning in 1850. The diary provides significant insights into Lincoln's thought, moods, and concerns. Orville and Eliza Browning are buried at Quincy's Woodland Cemetery. Several Lincoln friends are buried at Woodland, but the Brownings were Lincoln's most intimate, sharing personal tragedy and triumph.